Erev Tov Rabotai, we are continuing with our Mishna Yomi, Masechet Sanhedrin. We are up to Perek Vav Mishnah Daled. Today's Mishnayot should be Le'ilu Nishmat, Neria ben Svetlana Ranbayev, Eliyahu ben Burchai Israelov, Chana bad Miriam, Sason ben Raya, and Yehoshua ben Shifra, Menuchatam beGan Eden, Amen, and Avdi ben Chaim Lechaim, and the Refuah Shelema, Daniel Shalom ben Rosa, Betok Shachole Israel, and the Achlama Merav, Binyamin, Od Zion Chai ben Dvorah. The Mishnah describes the actual stoning. Bet Askila ya gavoa shte komot. The place of stoning was a structure that was twice the height of an average man. This height is enough to allow for a quick death when the condemned is pushed off the roof, but not so high that his body would smash and break apart, causing unnecessary disgrace. The condemned person is brought up to the roof of the structure, accompanied by the two witnesses, and his hands are tied, as the Rambam writes in Hilchot Sanhedrin, chapter 15, Halacha 1. One of the witnesses pushes him from behind so that he falls off the roof and lands on his chest. He is then turned over onto his back, because lying face downward is more shameful for him than lying face upward. And this is how Rashi and the Rav explained by the Melech Shlomo explained it. As the previous Mishnah taught, he was partially covered only in front but not in the back. Another reason he must be turned over on his back is that a large stone might have to be thrown on his chest, as the Mishnah will describe below. Imed bah yatsa. If he dies from the fall, the court has fulfilled its obligation. Although he was not pelted with stones, the mitzvah of execution by stoning has been fulfilled. This law is learned from Shemot chapter 19 verse 13, which equates execution by stoning to execution by falling. Only if he does not die from falling are stones thrown at him. But if he does not die from the fall, the second witness picks up the large heavy stone that was kept there for this purpose and places, which the commentators explain means throws, the stone on his chest. Now this stone is so heavy that two people were needed to lift it. The two witnesses raise the stone together, and the first one then pulls his hand away, allowing the second one to throw it down by himself. If he dies from this, the court has fulfilled its obligation. But if he still does not die, his stoning is carried out by all Israel, meaning everyone present at the execution throws rocks upon him until he dies. Shenemar, as it is stated in Dvarim, chapter 17, verse 7, the hand of the witnesses shall be upon him first to put him to death, and the hand of the entire nation afterwards. Since the witnesses actually saw the crime being committed, their knowledge of this person's guilt is much more certain than that of anyone else. Therefore, the Torah placed upon them the primary responsibility to carry out the punishment. The Mishnah discusses what is done with the body after the execution. All those who are stoned or hanged for a moment after their death in the manner described below. These are the words of Rabbi Eliezer. But the sages say, no one is hanged except the blasphemer, someone who curses God, and the idol worshipper. A person who curses God and a person who worships an idol are liable to death by stoning, as the Mishnah says in chapter 7, Mishnah 4. According to the sages, only someone executed for one of these two sins is hanged afterward, but someone who committed a different sin that carries the punishment of stoning is not hanged. All Tanaim agreed that a person executed by any of the other three methods, burning, beheading, and strangulation, is not hanged after the execution. And the dispute between Rabbi Eliezer and the sages is based on their interpretation of the verses in Dvarim, chapter 21, verses 22 and 23. Another dispute about the hanging, Aish Torino Tov Panav Klape Am, a man is hanged facing the people, Vaisha Panav Klape Ha'etz, and a woman is hanged facing the gallows. It is shameful for the corpse of a woman to be hanged facing the public, so it is hanged with its back to the people, facing the gallows. In the case of a man, however, where the shame is not as great, the corpse is hanged facing the people in order to leave a deeper impression upon them. These are the words of Rabbi Eliezer. Now, the purpose of hanging the condemned corpse is so that the people should see the terrible punishment he received for his sin, and they will be careful not to do it themselves. When they see the face of the person who is hanging, the impact is greater. But the sages say, only a man is hanged, a woman is not hanged at all. The sages derived this law from the verse in Vayikra, if a man shall have committed a sin, he shall be put to death, and when you shall hang him. Since the verse specifies a man, only the corpse of a man is hanged, and not the corpse of a woman. And the Rab tells us that Halakha does not follow the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer brings a proof to his opinion that the corpse of a woman is hanged Amar len Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer said to the sages, Va'alo Shimon ben Shatach tara nashim b'Ashkelon. But Shimon ben Shatach, an earlier Tana, hanged women in the city of Ashkelon. These women were practicing sorcery, a sin that carries the punishment of stoning, as it says in chapter 7, Mishnah 4. Shimon ben Shatach, who was a head of the Sanhedrin, as it says in Chagigat, chapter 2, Mishnah 2, had them stoned and then hanged. The sages responded that was a special case. Amrulo, they said to Rabbi Eliezer, Shimonim nashim tala. In that incident, Shimon ben Shatach hanged 80 women on the same day. Then danin shnaim biyom echad. And the law is that we may not judge even 2 cases involving the death penalty on the same day. If a court judges more than 1 case a day, it will not have enough time to fully explore every possibility that the defendant in each case is innocent. Clearly, this was a special case in which the regular rules of execution did not apply. Therefore, we cannot learn from it that the corpses of women are hanged. The sages argue that Shimon ben Shatach hanged the woman not because this was required by the Torah, but because the practice of witchcraft had become so widespread in his time that he wanted to show the people that it would not be tolerated. He therefore judged and executed the women all on the same day in order to prevent their relatives from gathering together to free them by force. Furthermore, even though the body of a woman should not be hanged, he hanged them afterward in order to publicize the matter and thereby discourage such behavior. And again, the Rav does tell us that Halacha does not follow the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. Now the Mishnah describes the hanging. Ketzat tolinoto, how do they hang him? Mishakirin et hakora ba'aretz, they drive a post into the ground. Va'etz yotzeh mimena, and a wooden beam extends from it, meaning a horizontal beam is attached to the top of the post, so it extends outward to form a gallows. Umakiv shtei yadav zo al gabe zo v'toleh oto, and an officer of the court brings the 2 hands of the corpse together, one on top of the other, and hangs it from the beam, meaning he ties the hands together with the rope and ties the other end of the rope to the beam, so the corpse is hanging from the rope by its hands. The convict is not hanged by his neck in the manner of government executions, as the Radvaz writes in the Sanhedrin, chapter 15, Halacha 7. The next Tana disagrees. Rabbi Yossi says, Hakora mutal akoltel, the post was not driven into the ground, but was leaned at an angle against the wall with the rope dangling from it. V'toleh oto kederech she'tabachin osin, and the officer hangs him from it in the way that butchers do, meaning he suspends the corpse from the diagonal post and does not make it lie upon the post. A butcher suspends a slaughtered animal from a hook so that it hangs freely in the air. This allows him to skin both the front and back of the animal. Similarly, the body of the executed person should be suspended in the air and not be made to lie alongside the post. And the dispute between the first time and Rabbi Yossi is based on their interpretations of Dvarim, chapter 21, verse 23. And the Rav does tell us that Halacha follows the opinion of the Chachamim. The procedure after hanging, umatirin oto miyad, after the corpse is hanged, they untie it immediately, remove it from the gallows and bury it. Leaving the corpse on the gallows for even a short time is considered a desecration of Hashem's honor, as the Mishnah will explain. V'im lan, and if it is left on the gallows overnight, over alav b'lo ta'aseh, the court transgresses a negative commandment, shenemar, lo talin nivlato ala etz ki kavod tikberenu. As it is stated in Dvarim, chapter 21, verse 23, you shall not leave his body overnight on the gallows, rather you shall surely bury him on that day. Although the verse states that the body should not be left on the gallows, it in fact means to prohibit leaving the body anywhere overnight without burying it. It mentions the gallows only to teach that if for some reason it is impossible to bury the body, it should at least be taken down from the gallows. Now the verse contains 2 commandments, a negative one and a positive one. The first phrase, you shall not leave his body overnight on the gallows, is a negative commandment against leaving a body without burial on the gallows or anywhere else until the next morning. The second phrase, you shall surely bury him on that day, is a positive commandment to bury it before the sun sets, as the Rambam writes in the Sanhedrin, chapter 15, Halacha 7 and 8. Ki kilelat Elohim talui v'gomer, because a hanging person is a curse of God, etc. Klomar mipnei mazet talui, that is to say, when people see the hanging body, they will say, why was the body of this person hanged? Mipnei sheberach et Hashem, because he blessed, meaning cursed, the name of God. And this Mishnah here follows the opinion of the sages that we quoted earlier, who hold that only one who curses Hashem or an idolater who is considered to have done so is hanged. And the term bless is substituted for curse because it is inappropriate even to speak of cursing with respect to the divine name. V'nimtza Shem Shamayim mitchalel. Therefore, the name of heaven is desecrated by his presence on the gallows. Since the hanging body reminds everyone that this person cursed God, it desecrates the name of heaven and must therefore be untied and removed from the gallows right away. Although the biblical requirement is only to bury the body before the sun sets, the rabbis were concerned that if it is left hanging for even a moment, this diminishes God's honor. We therefore hang the body to fulfill the obligation, but then immediately take it down. And that is it of Mishna Dalet. Now again, Mishna Dalet ended with an explanation of the verse, Ki killat Elohim talui, literally, because a hanging person is the curse of God, as quoted in Dvarim, chapter 21, verse 23. This Mishnah teaches another interpretation of this verse, Mishnah Hey. Amar Rabbi Meir said, B'shah she'adam mitzta'er, when a person is suffering for his sins, Shechina ma lashon omeret, what expression does the divine presence use to convey its grief? Kivyachol kalani miroshi kaleni mizroi. God says, so to speak, my head feels heavy, my arm feels heavy. The divine presence is compared here to a tired person who feels the weight of his limbs. The word kilat in the verse is interpreted as referring to a feeling of heaviness. The word kilat is composed of two words, kal, light, and let, not. So kilat means not light, which means heavy. When a person is stoned and hanged, God feels heavy because of his distress over the person's suffering. Although the person deserves to be punished for his sins, God does not want people to suffer. God prefers they not sin in the first place, or they repent and thereby avoid punishment. We can learn from this, if God is so pained over the spilled blood of the wicked, how much more so is he pained over the blood of the righteous, meaning the death of an innocent person. And the Mishnah returns to its previous topic, the negative commandment against letting the body of an executed person remain unburied overnight, which was you shall not leave his body overnight. Velo zu bilvad, it is not only in this case where a person was executed by the court that the Torah prohibits leaving the body overnight without burial, but anyone who leaves his dead relative unburied overnight transgresses the same negative commandment. The Gemara on page 46b in Sanhedrin derives from this very verse that the prohibition applies to all dead bodies and not just the body of an executed person. In the following situation, however, it is permitted to leave a body unburied for some time. If someone left it overnight because of the honor of the deceased, for example, to bring a coffin or shrouds for him, and all veralav, he does not transgress any prohibition because this is not disrespectful. Since the prohibition is learned from a verse that speaks of leaving a corpse hanging, it applies only in similar situations where leaving the body unburied is degrading. Therefore, delaying a burial in order to complete the funeral preparations is permitted, since this allows for the deceased to be honored. So for this same reason, we may delay a burial in order to give the relatives time to come to the funeral or to gather crowds to attend the funeral. And the Mishnah teaches where an executed person is buried, they do not bury him in his ancestors' burial plot, because a wicked person may not be buried close to a righteous person. This prohibition is derived from an incident recorded in the Book of Kings, Book 2, chapter 13, verse 21. Therefore, an executed convict may not be buried in his family's burial plot because they are presumed to have been righteous people. Although Mishnah 2 taught that a sinner who confesses before his death deserves a share in the world to come, that change of his status takes place only after his corpse has decomposed, as the next Mishnah implies. Rather, there were two cemeteries set aside for the use of the court, one for those executed by beheading or strangulation, and one for those executed by stoning or burning. These are the four methods of execution, as it says in chapter 7, Mishnah 1. Just as a wicked person may not be buried next to a righteous person, a very wicked person may not be buried near someone who is less wicked. Stoning and burning, which are the two harshest methods of execution, are given to those who committed the worst crimes, while beheading and strangulation, which are less harsh, are used for those who committed lesser crimes. We therefore bury those who were stoned or burned separately from those who were beheaded or strangled. In fact, even these two groups are not equal. Stoning is more severe than burning, and beheading is more severe than strangulation. Nevertheless, the court does not set aside 4 cemeteries, one for each type of execution, because it was taught to Moshe at Mount Sinai, that only 2 cemeteries should be designated. Therefore, the convict was buried alongside those executed in a similar manner as himself. And that is the Nabotai of today's Mishna Yomi. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen v'amen.